Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
I want to share a word with you right now about the comfort zone. For those of you who are looking at this, ask yourself, what's my comfort zone? Where are the places where I feel most comfortable in life? And, with men, we call it the man cave. Very often it's in the basement of the house or maybe a room somewhere with a big television, maybe a sound system. And people become very comfortable in the man cave. And in the Bible, you can find something relevant about everything. And there's a story from 1 Samuel chapter 22 in the life of David. David, the second king of Israel. And David, as the second king of Israel, is in a predicament. On the one hand, he is actually, he's fighting for Saul, who's the first king, but Saul becomes jealous of David. And, it's a horrible thing when somebody's jealous of your success. David is doing so well. After he killed Goliath, the women of the land in Israel, in Jerusalem, were singing a song saying, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And once Saul heard that, he was just fit to be tied. And so there's this back and forth relationship between Saul and David. And eventually it gets so bad, David leaves. And he's on the run. And as David leaves, he's out in the hill country. He has told his men, he said, whatever you do, don't kill Saul. Don't fight Saul's men. But Saul's men are fighting David and his men. And it's getting increasingly more difficult. And so finally, David shows up at a place called Adullam. And there are caves there. And he goes to the caves at Adullam. And he takes with him hundreds of men. He's got at least 400 men who go with him into the cave of Adullam. His mother and his father come with him to the cave of Adullam. His older brothers, who laughed at him and mocked him when he began asking questions about who will stand up to Goliath, his brothers now know that David is a natural-born killer. David, kills Goliath, and then he runs around the battlefield with the head of Goliath. He puts the head of Goliath on his tent. And I think his older brothers look at him and said, my God, what kind of guy is this? We never saw that coming. And so David is acknowledged as quite a warrior on the one hand, but on the other hand, he gets worn down by Saul and the adversaries who would keep coming after him. And so David gets his small group of fighters, relatively small, called the Mighty Men. And they go to the caves of Adullam. He has his wives there with him in the caves of Adullam. And he settles down. And I imagine, those caves of Adullam are in the southern part of Israel, south of Jerusalem. And I think David grew up near that area. And as a boy, he probably played in the caves of Adullam. And evidently, the caves of Adullam are so expansive, so large, that it could accommodate 400 men and David's extended family. And so he's very comfortable there. He sends his mother and his father to the land of Moab. We may forget this. When you read about David, the grandparents of David were Moabites, who historically, did not always get along with the Jewish people. But he sends his mother and his father to the land of Moab. And he says to the king of Moab, take care of my mother and my father while I settle my business. And they take his mother and his father in. And so David settles down there in this big cave, if you will. But eventually, in the 22nd chapter of 1 Samuel, a prophet named Gad comes to David at the cave of Adullam. And he said, David, you have to leave the cave. He says, David, it's time for you to leave the cave. And David realizes that the prophet is speaking the word of God. And at that point, David gets his brothers. He reaches out to his wives and these 400 men. And he says, we have to leave. And leaving the cave was one of the best things that happened to David. Because once he leaves the cave, David's life and his trajectory never goes backwards. He hits the ground running. He hits the ground fighting. He never fights Saul, but he and his men are ready from that point on. And so what's the lesson I want to share with you today? I believe somebody looking at this right now is stuck in a cave. Somebody looking at this right now is very comfortable with the cave-type existence that you're living. Somebody looking at this right now is comfortable in your cave. You're comfortable living a substandard kind of living. Somebody looking at this is very comfortable even though you're underpaid, underrepresented, underrespected, but at least it's your life. And what I'm here to do, I'm like the prophet Gad. I want to prod you, and I want to challenge you to ask yourself, am I doing everything I could do with my life? Am I wasting some time? Am I wasting my body? Am I wasting my mind? Or am I, through my life, really ready at a point where it's time for me to come out, to break through from that cave of comfort? And what is your cave of comfort? Somebody looking at this may be in the cave of comfort professionally, where you're living a life, you're getting paid, but you're not getting paid as much as you could. Somebody looking at this right now is in a cave of comfort with your wife or with your husband. You're living your life, you're enjoying your life to a certain extent, but you're not making the most of your life. And the question really is, at what point do I break through, break free from the cave of my comfort? I think there's somebody looking at this right now who's spiritually stuck in a cave. And when I say spiritually stuck in a cave, what I'm saying is, you have a comfortable existence with God, but you're really not pressing the envelope. You're really not pressing the threshold of what you could do with your prayer life, what you could do with your charity life, what you could do with your theological thoughts, your theological awareness. You're not reading the Bible as much as you ought to read it. You're not living the faith as much as you could and should live the faith. And at some point, we need a prophet like Gad in our lives to say, wake up, my brother, wake up, my sister. It's time to get out and break free from that cave. It's time to break free from this existence that you've become so doggone comfortable with. And I think that God is looking at us at every stage of life saying, what will you do with your life now? I have friends who look at me and say, Nick, when will you retire? And I say back to them, I'm trying to figure retirement out. But frankly, most of the people I talk to who are retired sometimes just settle down in a comfortability of retirement. And at some point, we need to ask ourselves, what more is the Lord calling me to do right now? What is the next mountain the Lord wants me to climb? What is the next river the Lord wants me to swim? What is the next thought the Lord wants me to think about? What is the next thing God wants me to do physically? And I tell you, I go to the gym 3 times a week and I try to ask myself, Lord, how will you help me to push my body even further? And so the challenge that I'm giving you right now, my friends, is look at your life, the way you're living it, and ask yourself, am I stuck in a zone of comfort? Or am I at the point like David, where it's time to break free from my comfort zone and to take my life to the next level? My friends, I'm praying for you right now, and I want you to know God has more in store for you than maybe you've ever even imagined. But you'll never really find out how much God has for you until you're ready to break free from that comfort zone. God bless, God keep you, and remember, I'm praying for you.
We hope you have enjoyed the first portion of today's broadcast. This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
This is Pastor Nick Hood. Thanks so much for being with us in this second phase of this episode. I began a few minutes earlier talking about David in the cave of Adullam, and how eventually in 1 Samuel 22, the prophet Gad came to him and said, David, it's time to leave the cave. And how in each of our lives, there's something like the cave of Adullam, the cave of comfort. And Dr. Orton, I'm joined by Dr. Gina Orton and Reverend Ian Straker. What are your thoughts about the prophet Gad telling David it's time to leave the cave?
I find it very interesting to have someone of wisdom and who's older and I'm assuming wiser and closer to the Lord to give you that kind of advice, and you don't have to kind of figure it out for yourself, but I think most of us have to figure that out for ourselves. And as you said in your sermon, you know, how do you know that you've reached a place of comfort that maybe it is time to move to something different, or that the Lord might be calling you to something that may not be comfortable anymore? And sometimes the Lord does call us to a sacrificial life or to make a change or to do something different in this journey of life that He's given us. And so to me, it sounds easier to have someone else tell me, but for me to realize for myself that it's time to make a change and it's time to do something different, and then to decide I've got to draw closer to the Lord so that I know what change to make, were the thoughts that came to my mind.
Reverend Ian Straker, give me your your thoughts from a theological perspective. What's really happening between the prophet Gad and David on the run?
Well, as I think about it, first of all, the cave is not a bad place to be.
Right.
And the issue, I think, is finding the balance. David needed the cave, and it was a place where he could rest, regroup, get his forces together. Had he not had the cave, he might not have had anything left to do anything with. So we need those moments of respite. We need those times where we can sort of recoup and regroup in ways to regain our strength. But if we're going to be of use to the Lord, to simply stay there sort of pulls ourselves off the battlefield. And if you don't get back in the fray, you can't push the envelope on God's behalf. How do you know when you've been there too long? Well, we might need a prophet to come and gird us, to goad us to move out. But to just stay there, how much of the Lord's work are we doing when we are simply caring for ourselves in a place of safety? When we know that the value of our faith is to empower us to go and to take the message by word and especially by deed into places that aren't always comfortable, that aren't always safe. So yes, had David stayed in the cave, the stories in the Bible about David would be very, very different for everything that follows after this episode.
That's a good point. I share a little personal story that I've told very few people about. But when you all knew me in my third year of divinity school, so the fall of 75, graduated in 1976. The fall of 75 for me was just a delightful time. I had come through the summer in 1975 in New Orleans, back in my home church, a church where my father had pastored, where I was born into, and it became a very stressful summer for a lot of reasons. I had become a licentiate minister. The church was without a pastor, and I was doing everything from weddings, funerals, preaching every Sunday, and doing the kinds of things that ministers do, visiting the sick, doing youth work. The great trumpet player, Terrence Blanchard, have you heard of him?
Yes.
He was in my youth group.
Oh, wow.
When he was 12. And so on one hand, I was having a lot of fun down there, but on the other hand, it was a very stressful setting. And around November of that year, my third year, final year in divinity school, I got a phone call from my father. And he said, "Nick, I just want to know, have you gotten an offer to pastor a church yet?" I said, "No." He said, "Are you looking to pastor a church?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Dad, I'm just having a good time." And my father kind of, and I was having a good time. You guys were in my choir. I had a girlfriend who ended up being my wife. I was riding my bike up to East Rock and West Rock. Having a ball out there at the Yale Divinity School, directing a choir. But it was my father, like the prophet Gad, who's on the phone, the other line, saying, "Nick, you're at the end of the road, man. You're going to graduate in a few months, God willing." And he said, "If you don't have a calling, then why don't you come back to Detroit and work with me?" He said, "Work with me for 2 years." He said, "It'll take you 5 years to learn the job. But why don't you come back here and work with me?" And I said, "Okay." And I really didn't think about it that much. But now that I'm talking with you about David being kind of shook up by the prophet Gad to come out from the cave, for me, that last year of divinity school was like being in the cave of Abdullah. I was just having a ball. And all I had to do was just do my homework. And, I think that for each of us, there comes a point in life where sometimes we just need somebody to shake us up and say, "Hey, it's time to take your life to the next level." And I'm just curious to hear a little bit more from you, Dr. Orton, about this whole business of when do we know the balance between the cave of comfort and maybe the discomfort of doing something totally different? And how do we know that we're on the right track?
Wow, that's a very tough question. Do we always know that we're on the right track?
You're the psychiatrist.
I know.
I can't
That's why I
believe that's
got
a
that
tough question for you.
You know, culturally, we're often taught to look for comfort.
Yes.
Lovely homes, nice car, good income, good job,
pharmaceutical products.
And just stay there.
To make us comfortable.
Yeah, so once you find that comfort zone, why would you leave it? Mm-hmm. That's counterintuitive. The whole goal is to become comfortable. But then in what philosophy is that? But the philosophy of Christ is not to be comfortable. But as you mentioned, Reverend Straker, to keep looking for that opportunity to work for and with Christ in his will and purpose for our lives. And so we can assume that when we get comfortable, perhaps that's the time that God is then going to say, I want to make you uncomfortable, but I'm also going to take you to another level and bring you to a place of greater promise, greater accomplishment. You're going to minister to others and change others' lives. And what could be more wonderful than that? Knowing that the true comfort is going to be eternal rest with Christ Jesus. Then we can truly be comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Ian Straker, from a theological standpoint, what does it mean to confront the discomfort of Jesus? I mean, in a sense, you know, when Jesus calls us to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, to stand up for justice, to love your neighbor as you love yourself, even when your neighbor might treat you terribly. What does that say about the message of Jesus in our lives, in terms of this discomfort?
Well, both of us had access to a seminary professor who said he did not know why anyone in their right mind would sign up to be a Christian, where the central symbol of the faith is a cross.
Now, which professor was that again?
It was Leon Watts.
No, I know. Leon Watts from the AMEZ Church.
Yeah, exactly.
Great theologian.
You know, where the symbol of the cross is what? It's suffering.
Suffering.
It's shame. It's public humiliation. You know, for all the prosperity preachers out there, they need to go back and look at the cross and recover, you know, the essentials of what it is that this Christian life is about. We are not called to comfortable self-satisfaction. As Christians, we are called to a life of service. It seems important to me that we understand that being a Christian calls us to be part of a community, and it's by being part of the community that we can take cues from others in the community as to when we've had enough comfort and need to get back in the fray. And sometimes even you've been in the fray, we see you fraying at the edges, you might need to take a step back and regroup before you go back into the battle. And so I want to put a commercial in for church where we can find loving friends who care about us and can see how
I like that.
To see how we're doing. I mean, I have friends who say sometimes, you know, have you been getting enough rest? You look a little haggard. Maybe you need to take some time out before you get back into however wonderful the project is. You know, not that you should stop the project, but stop and take a breath. And you get that from a community of like believers who understand what the Christian walk is to be about and are willing to have us all walk together and not get weary as we try to reach the promised land.
Well spoken, Reverend Ian Straker. I'm so glad to have you and Dr. Gina Orton, my friends from my youth, to make the trip out to Detroit to be a part of this show. And I hope God God will give us an opportunity to do this again.
Okay.
But until then, I want to thank those of you who are looking at our program today. I thank you for your support. It means so much to me on an emotional level, just to know that you are out there watching this program, hoping and praying. I want to thank those of you who've been calling in praying, and asking for prayer. I want to thank those of you who are making contributions to make this program really a reality. And I think there's a message out there that we are delivering, and I'm just so glad to be able to share it with you. And so until next week, may the Lord bless you, may the Lord keep you. As I say in my church, before I say that, I say, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and grant you peace, both now and forevermore. My friends, remember, I am praying for you.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
Thank you for watching today's program. We hope you've been blessed in a powerful way. Just knowing you took the time to watch today's broadcast is a great encouragement to Pastor Nick Hood. If this broadcast has been a blessing to you, we ask that you mail a tax-free donation to Nicholas Hood Ministries at 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.